Behind every face is a feeling. But more often than we'd like to admit, our faces and feelings don't always match. Because some struggles live under the surface, under the skin, anxious, fearful, lost. We hate to admit it, but those faces and feelings are there. They're real. Around us and inside us, hidden in the shadows of our hearts. It's no wonder we feel alone, unseen, or even misunderstood. But hope is found in the place where the shadows come into the light. Hope is found in knowing you're not alone. Help is found in the courage to honestly and regularly answer one very simple yet very profound question. How are you feeling?
Well, we're so glad you would be with us here as we go into the second week of this series, How Are You Feeling? If you missed it last week, I would encourage you can go back any point. You can go to our YouTube channel. You can watch it, our live services. You can watch our Church Where You Are services, where whatever works the best for you. But this series, if you're today, number one, if you've been invited and this is your first week in this series, thank you so much for being here. We believe that there's an important message that needs to come out of all of this, and that's something that we all need to hear. Nobody is exempt from the conversations that we're having right here and right now. In the series, How You Feeling, has been designed to the idea to really ask that question, because the question gets asked, right? How you feeling? How you doing? Right? And we all have our standard pat answers, which is good, fine, okay. Those are really our answers. Those are the things that we throw out there. And there's a various number of reasons of why we would say those things. There's a purpose behind those things, and many of it has actually nothing to do with what we're actually feeling on the inside. We would use those as a cover, as a mask. You know, we would use it as, this is the face that I want you to see, but really what's truly going on inside is not what I'm saying is actually happening. And so this series is about, we need to really, let's start having these conversations. Because whether we choose to believe it or not, and what the world is showing us from all around ourselves, and what you may be experiencing, is that we're in the midst of a mental health crisis in this world, where we're not sure how to handle what's going on in between here and what's going on in here. That it's wrecking our lives and the lives of the people around us. And what our belief is truly, if we are really ever going to be able to work through these things, the first and most important thing that we can do is we can bring it out into the light. We can begin to have the conversation. And you see on the seats that are around you, the seat that you probably sat on, there's cards on there that say, how are you feeling? On the back side of it is just a space for you to write information down, because maybe you're experiencing something that you haven't shared with anyone yet. And you're not sure how to work through any of that. Well, our purpose, the desire behind what we're doing is that we want to offer that space, that there's people who love Jesus, who want to be able to be there and listen to what is going on in your life. We talked about that last week, that's an important piece of the anxiety that we're feeling, the overwhelming nature of what's happening, the weight that we experience in our life that feels like there's no way through what we're experiencing. The anxiety, that there is a way through it. There truly is a way through it. And today we're not venturing off all that far. In fact, we're going to talk about anxiety's ugly cousin, and that's we're going to talk about fear. So when the question is asked, and you're really truly experiencing what this fear that's rising up inside of you, when somebody says, "Well, how you feeling?" and you say, "Well, I'm fearful." Then maybe we can begin to have that conversation. And today's conversation is about what do we do next with that. Because here's the thing: is when we take anxiety and we take fear, many times they're lumped together. They feel very much the same. If you've ever experienced anxiety or if you've experienced fear, there's pretty similar feelings that you're experiencing in the midst of that. But there are definitely differences in each way. Anxiety is the fear of the things that are to come, the worry of what potentially could be happening. But fear is that real emotion when we're faced with something as an imminent threat to our well-being, right? Like we know what fear feels like when you hear the grizzly bear outside the door, right? Like, is it going to come through the door? There's a real fear that we begin to experience in the midst of that. That's a fear. That's a natural fear. That's an emotion that God gave us so that we can respond properly. Because, well, if there's an imminent threat to my life and my well-being, I need to do what is correct in moving away from that. But the problem is too many times in our life, that is not the fear that we're experiencing. The fear that we experience really many times has nothing to do with the imminent threat that's in our life. Although there are imminent threats that we don't actually declare that's what that is. In Scripture, we often, you hear the phrasing of a fearful-hearted, meaning that there's something in here that is going on. It's described this state of this emotion that we're experiencing of feeling like there's something that's going to happen to our well-being. And this fearful-hearted is being fearful-hearted. I about did it, folks. I kind of did, didn't I? Yeah. That's recorded. Thank you. First service, please. Let's not do second service. Anyways. Gee, that's going to get replayed more. Oh, my word. Anyways. Being fearful-hearted is not the same as just being disappointed or dismayed. It's when we're fearful in our heart. I got to find a better way to say this. This is a fear that I have. It's being lived out on stage. This is fantastic. Oh my gosh. When we're fearful, when we face a threat or an obstacle that appears too big for us to manage, it causes us to retreat within ourselves. And there's all types of different fears. It's not just the imminent threat of like our physical well-being, but there's the imminent threat of our mental well-being, the imminent threat of our spiritual well-being, of our emotional well-being. There's imminent threats that we have fear that holds us hostage in our lives, that keeps us from taking the next step, which God has for us. The fear of criticism and illness and death and poverty. There's so many different fears that we experience. And what God desires for us, well, I think we can begin to see this, and you see it through every account that you begin to see through here. You see God working through people's fears. Very real, reasonable fears that people have. God is wanting to help us move through that and do something greater. He wants to do something greater in us and through us than what we can do when we're hindered by our fear. So we look at the story. We look back to the story of three men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You can find this in the book of Daniel way back when. You can see that they definitely, I can understand, it doesn't necessarily say, but I can imagine that they would have some fearful hearts. There would definitely be some fear that's going on inside of them. So to understand what's taking place, see, in this time, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are part of a group of people who have been removed from their homeland in Israel, and they find themselves in the enemy territory of Babylon. And Babylon is doing everything they can to change the way these people are thinking. The people who have a one God, that they're the one true God, who are trying to follow Him, they're trying to adjust the way they're thinking, change the way they're living. And it's becoming all the more evident that they have to take a stand in all of this. In fact, King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king at that time, he had built this gigantic golden statue in his image. And he declared that all people, not just Babylonians, but the Israelites as well, needed to, when music was to play, they were to bow down and worship this idol. This is a problem. This is a big problem for those who subscribe to the Israelite God. the one true God. This is a problem. They know that they cannot do this. This is number one thing that they cannot do, and this is what they're being asked to do. And these individuals, they had risen up through the ranks because they'd been running around with Daniel, and some things had been taking place. God had given them favor in the world that they were living in at the time, and they were finding themselves rising up through the ranks. In fact, because they're rising up the ranks, it becomes an even bigger issue with the king and the people that are around him. In fact, that's where we pick it up in Daniel chapter 3, verse 12. It says this, "But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." We got ourselves a problem. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Is this really true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. You're doing what you're supposed to do. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So we're in a serious moment here. A pivotal moment in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's life. In their story, what's going to take place. This is a pivotal moment. It's either they choose one or two options. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They got to make a decision. They're either going to do what the world around them is telling them they have to do. They're going to worship the things that the world around them is telling them they need to worship. They're going to do exactly as the king was telling them to do, or they were going to die. That was it. And so in this, you see this moment of, I can understand why they would have, I'm not in their emotions. I don't know exactly what they're experiencing, but they're human beings. I would imagine that there is some fear, real fear that they are experiencing. What are we going to do? They know what they're supposed to do. The fear is, what is going to happen to us if we do what we know we are supposed to do? So they get an opportunity to respond to the king. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." Probably not a good start. "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up." Big stance, big moment, big deal. With fearful hearts, they do what they believe that they are supposed to do. And they tell King Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I'm going to trust our God. And this is amazing. You know that there's got to be a little bit of fear in here too, because they go, even if, right? Like, come on, let's be real honest. We got some even if moments, don't we? Like, I'm going to trust you even if that doesn't work out the way I want it to. Right? But this is a big deal. Everything is on the line for these guys. Nebuchadnezzar's response. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them had changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the royal advisors crowded around them. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. And then Nebuchadnezzar, blown away, says, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree the people of any nation or language who say anything against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned in piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Powerful story of obedience to God when life, it looks like it's at its very end, trusting that they have a God who's going to show up in the midst of this, having a faith so strong that even if he doesn't, they know that God is going to do something through it. We see a wonderful resolution to this, right? That's exciting. It's amazing. What a miracle of God. And many of you may be sitting out there going, it sounds pretty far-fetched. I got stuff in my life. I haven't seen God show up yet in any of those things. I've got my own furnaces that I'm dealing with. And I feel like God has been there in any of that. And I'm really afraid of if I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to have the conversation with the person who I know I need to have this conversation with. That I'm going to, knowing what is right to do, that I'm actually going to be the person in my workplace that no one else is being called to who I'm supposed to be. That in my school, that I will be a representative of Jesus Christ, even though nobody else wants to hear it. Like these things that we know that we have that are facing us, that we're like, I don't know. I got some real fear about how I can actually live this out. How can I actually do this? In many ways, we would love to be able to escape the fear that we have in our lives, wouldn't we? We would love to be able to move right on through those things. Well, I believe that we look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's story, and I think we can see that through their story, there's probably approximately three ways that we can really escape what we fear, and ultimately will build our faith. I think there's definitely options out there of what can take place when we've got the fire, the furnaces of our life, the things that we're not sure, that we got to make a decision. It really could be detrimental to my success or my being. We've got to make a decision. So I think there's three ways that we can go through. We can escaping what we fear that will build faith. The first one is this: is that we can remove the furnace. The second thing is that we can make it through the fire. And the third thing is that we can be taken by the fire. So looking through the story, these are things that I think that these are options in our life of how we escape our fear to see faith being built up. And that first one, to remove the furnace. Boy, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Like, meaning I don't have to face the fire? Like I can just go on about my business and I won't experience this difficulty, this potential thing in my life that can be detrimental to who I think I am? These things that could be detrimental just to my life in general, like this, I could just not have this? Like I'm pretty sure that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they'd have been totally cool with no furnace, right? Walking into it like, hey, Lord, please remove the furnace. Please remove the fire. Snuff it out. Would have been complete. We all would love to have that, wouldn't we? This seems like the best way through our life is that we would not experience a furnace. We would ask God to remove the furnace. And here's the thing. God is capable. God is a big God. God removes furnaces in people's lives all the time. We see it in Scripture. We see it in the life of Jesus, the ministry that he had, the people that he would come across. He would remove furnaces from their lives. There would be blind that could see, deaf that could hear, lame that could walk, dead that would rise again. Like there were some serious furnaces removed from people's lives. You know, what's really interesting about that is that although it was a spectacle and many saw it, what you saw in most of the, for instance, let me share this one in Matthew 29:30. Just after Jesus has healed a man's eyes and he's able to see, so then he touched their eyes and said, according to your faith, let it be done to you. And their sight was restored. Jesus warned them sternly, see that no one knows about this. Why would he do that? Why would he heal somebody and they go, just me and you? Because I think sometimes in our life, for those furnaces, when we experience a furnace, a fire being removed from our life, it's to build our faith. It's to build our faith because that means that there's probably a furnace that's on its way. That there's going to be another option. There's going to be another opportunity where we're going to have to experience fire in our life. And what are we going to do? I mean, look at that. When there's a furnace being removed, right? Maybe you've experienced this in your life where God has done something that is very clear that God had his hand in it, and you were like, I trust him. I trust God in a big way now. I believe that he is who he says he is. Like it builds our faith. I think the second thing that we gain from this story is that from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is that another option of building our faith and escaping through the fire would be we make it through the fire. That we actually go through it. Much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That there's no avoiding it. That there's a way through it. But we end up going through it. And friends, I'm going to say this, and this may not feel good, but more times than not, we have to go through the fire. More times than not, we are going to experience the brokenness of this world. And this is what we have to experience, God coming through it with us, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego experienced. That's why we see James, the brother of Jesus, say, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Consider it pure joy that you would experience the fire. It would be so much easier if the furnace was removed. But there's something to be said about going through the fire in all of it. In 1 Peter, Peter says it this way. He says, in all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These trials have come, so that the proven genuineness of your faith compares it to of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire. That through all of this, it may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. When you see this, especially when you look at this in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you see that there is no way around it. If they're going to do what they've been called to do, they got to go through the fire. But in this, it does something far greater, a far greater worth, because what happens is Christ is revealed in the midst of it. People see Jesus in the fire with them. That is the beauty of what he was willing to do, that if we're going to go through a fire, his promises, he's not removing himself from the fire, but he will walk through it with us. That is of great worth, especially in our lives. That's why when metals are refined, when they're brought to what they're supposed to be, they're put into a fire, and all the impurities are burned out, lifted out of this, so you have a pure, righteous piece of metal. And his desire is that we would experience that as well. Sometimes there's suffering that we need to experience that'll burn out those impure things that are within us. And when we experience those things, we come out on the other side far better than what we went in. Listen, friends, I'm not speaking from a high top place. I'm speaking from experience in my own life. I've been through some fires, some moments where it's like, it might just be easier just to give this up. A lot of questions and doubts going on. And I can tell you that on the other side of these things, on the other side of the fire, I turned out to be a better person. far greater than what I went in with. Do I ever want to do it again? No. It sucked. And right now, there's a fire probably in your life, and it sucks. But what I'm telling you is if you invite Jesus into that fire with you, if you say, Lord, I need you in the midst of all of this, I need you to help me move through this fire, I'm telling you, on the other side of it, you are going to be far greater than what you went into it. So the fear that we may have that holds on to us, keeps us from stepping into that, we can understand that he goes with it, through it with us. And it's better on the other side for us. The next one is this. From the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I would say, was be taken by the fire. The other option through this is to be taken by the fire. What? Wait. So what do you mean by that? Do you mean? Because that was another option in the midst of this. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if God didn't show up in the midst of all of that, even if their life was going to be snuffed out, that there was something greater on the other side of that. That there was a greater story, a greater testimony to be spoken of their faith in the midst of that. Paul writes to the Philippians and he says it this way, to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So let me break this down. To live is Christ. That means that my life is given over to him. That means that in those places where there's fear residing within me, the fear that's keeping me from moving to what he wants me to do, because I'm afraid of what people are going to say. I'm afraid of what people are going to do. I'm afraid of what this is going to look like on me. In those places, when I decide to say yes to Jesus, that is truly living. That is truly living when we decide to say, yeah, this is not probably going to look good for me, but I'm going to trust Jesus in the midst of this. That's when we really begin to figure out what life is. And then on the other side of it, to die is to gain. That means I've got eternity with him in a far greater place. But this are the options. That's pretty heavy when you come to think about it. But this is the reality. This is the reality of what we have the opportunity to experience. And the fear that we have is important to acknowledge. It's important to understand that there's more to it. In fact, Paul writes to Timothy, a young man who's leading churches, who probably is experiencing fear of what people are going to think about him. And we know it because Paul talks to him about it. But in the midst of this, he says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." This piece of scripture, I don't know if it really resonated with me as much as it does today. But what I see in that is that what he's telling Timothy is that fear is just not an emotion. Like there's emotion that God gives us. It's a God-given emotion that helps us, protects us, sends us in the right direction. But there's also the spirit of fear. The spirit of fear, which doesn't go away. It hangs on to us. It keeps us. It chains us to the doghouse. It doesn't let us move freely to roam as God would want us to do. But it holds on to us. And that, friends, that fear that we experience, the ever nagging one, the one that doesn't seem to go away, that doesn't come from God. He doesn't give us that. That is not from him. God will never use fear to lead us to do anything in our lives. Does this fear a tool? It absolutely is. Will he gain our attention? Absolutely. But he doesn't use it to guide our lives to say, this is the direction you need to go. Fear me. That's not what he says. He says, I want what's good for you, what's best for the kingdom and the world around you. This is the direction that I offer to you. God has not, and he doesn't give us that spirit of fear that holds on to us, but he gives us power over that fear. God gives us power and love and a sound mind. So where does that spirit of fear come from? It comes from the enemy. It comes from the devil. It comes from Satan. Satan not only puts fear on us, but he puts that fear on us so he can control us. So we don't actually live out what God is calling us to do. So instead of having that conversation that we know we should have the opportunity maybe to share our faith, we stay back because we don't share it because we're afraid of what somebody's going to think. That with the conversation that we need to have with a loved one, we know it's probably not going to be pleasant, so it fills us with fear. What Satan wants us to do is not have that conversation. He wants us to be divided. He doesn't want us to be united. This is the truth. Satan will use fear to chain us to the doghouse so we can't live out God's best for our life. And God has something that's great for each and every one of us. So there's fear's good. There's the circumstantial, right? The circumstantial fear, which knowing, like the bear is outside the door. I don't open the door because I don't want to get killed by the bear. Makes sense. That's good fear. Bad fear, the spirit of fear, is the one that keeps us in the house days and months and years after the bear has gone away. That's the spirit of fear that we have to fight against, that we have to bring Jesus into and help us to understand that there's so much more for our lives, that there is an opportunity for each and every one of us. That spirit of fear can't hold on to us. The idea that the other shoe is going to drop, I'm just waiting for it, so I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to go broke, so I'm not going to give. I'm not going to do these things that I know that I'm being called to do. I'm going to die. I'm going to get sick. Something's going to happen that's going to harm me. These things wear us down. They wear us down. You tired yet? You tired of what the world continues to pile on with the fear and the anxiety? This is where these things begin to mesh together. These is where these two cousins come together and begin to work with one another. They just hold on to us and keep us from doing what God has desired for our lives, to live in full freedom that He offers for us. We can't handle, the problem is we can't handle long-term anxiety and fear. Our brains are not created in that way. So we begin to shut down. We begin to stay in bed. We begin to pull the covers over our heads. We begin to live in this world of depression because the spirit of fear has taken over us. So how do we go beyond this? How do we overcome this fear? How do we get beyond this? I want to talk about there's 4 things that we need to enter into our lives that we probably need to do when we're experiencing fear and the spirit of fear. The first thing is to admit your fear without shame. It's to admit that you're afraid. That's why we're here. That's why those cards are there. Because right now something's holding you back. The greatest thing that we could ever do is to bring that to the light, to bring it out. If we hold on to it, we don't do anything with it. We just hold it to ourselves. This is my fear. I'm going to stay safe. I'm going to hold on to this. I'm not moving beyond this. We hold on to that. Nothing ever changes with it. The only way that we begin to fight against this battle of fear is when we admit it and we bring it out. And it's important to understand that there is no shame in that. Why? Because we all have it. If you don't, you're lying. We all have this fear in our lives. Sometimes it raises its ugly head in times that we don't expect. We all have fears. Listen to this, 1 Peter 5-6, it says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time. The humility, the humbleness to bring it out into the open and say, hey, I've got some fear. What do I do with this? If we bring it out into the midst of that, we humble ourselves, that means God can do something with this. And if there's anything that we can gain from this, anything that would forever change our lives, the willingness to be able to humble ourselves and bring it out into the light is so that God can deal with it. So that the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one that breathed everything into motion, the one who is from the beginning and will be there at the very end, that one, the one high above all things, will lift us up. That's powerful stuff. We don't have to pick ourselves up. If we humble ourselves, He will lift us up. The second thing we need to do is when we have decided that we admit that we have fear and we openly we admit to our fear without shame, we submit it to God. We give it to Him. We hand it to Him. We pass it along. We hit that submit button. You know, when you hit that submit button, there's no taking it back, right? It goes. That's one of the scariest things in the world, isn't it? Right? The greatest tragedy to all mankind is that now the iPhones will allow you to edit your text messages. Terrible. Terrible idea, because here's the deal. When we send it, it means we can't bring it back. We can't take that back. But too many times in our lives, we have that fear, we put it at His feet, and then we walk away for just a moment and turn around and go, well, I feel a lot better if I have that. Could I just take that? And here's the thing about Jesus. He's going to give it back to you. If you want it, he'll give it back to you because he's a gentleman. He's not going to hold on to it. He's not going to keep it away from you. If you give it to him and you come back going, well, I just need that, he's going to give it back. But he is so good and he's so faithful that if when we place it in his hands and we walk away and say never again, it's never again. He's willing to take that fear. He's willing to take it for us. James 4:7, submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. The devil is going to use our fear. The devil will keep us from doing what God has for us, what's best for our lives. And that fear is the way that it happens because we won't step into what's next. He will use it for us. But if we submit it to him, he has no option. He has to flee from there. That frees us, brings us into freedom. The third thing that we think we can do is that we need to face our fears by faith. So when we admit that we have fear, when we submit it to God, we don't just sit there, but we step into the face of that fear that we have. We got to do something with it. We got to, in faith, we have to be willing to step forward into it and watch what God does with all of that. I'm telling you, He is willing to tear down those walls. It takes just a little bit of faith. It's just the smallest bit of faith. He talks about the faith the size of a mustard seed will move mountains. You have mountains in your life right now. You have fears in your life right now that you can't quite step into what's next. There may be a job that you're like, oh, I should do this. I know that God's best in my life is to be doing this, but I just can't get myself to, because that bit of faith, that little bit of faith, that smallest step of faith, you begin to see God show His trustworthiness, His faithfulness. One of the greatest things, the greatest phrase I ever heard in my life that changed my life forever, Pastor Byron, however many years ago at this point, was standing on stage and he says, we invite you to lean in with all that you have. Lean in so much that if you fall, the only answer is for God to catch you in the midst of it. Lean in changed my ever-loving life. It caused me to go and to change positions in a job. It caused my wife, our family's trajectory in our life. I stand here today because there took a little bit of faith of standing and going, I don't know what this means, but I'm going to trust you. And the crazy part about it is He's going to catch you. It may not be until you're right before the floor, but He's going to catch you. If you're putting your faith and your trust in Him, He's going to be there to catch you and lift you up. Galatians 2:20 says this, I've been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. Jesus did not give up His life so that we'd be shackled by fear. Jesus came to this earth, lived this life, gave up His life so that we could live in freedom, in purpose, in the fullness that He has for each and every one of us. Each and every one, let me say that, each and every one of us. Today you may be sitting in those seats and going, that's not me, that you're wrong. You're wrong. He has something incredible for you. He wants you to trust Him in the midst of it. And when we begin to live these things out, we begin to admit our fears, we begin to submit our fears to God, we face our fears by faith, then we need to really do is we need to start thinking right. Because if we're not thinking right, we're going to go right back to those places. We're going to sneak right back there and grab a hold of those fears and hold them onto them for ourselves. But if we begin to think right, we begin to think as He would want us to think, if we would follow what Paul wrote to the Philippians, if we would actually make this a mantra in our life, that we would live this out, that finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. When we do that, if we're thinking about what God's best is for our life, that is going to change the direction of our life. To realize that even though this fire is going to stink, even though it's going to hurt, even though it's going to be painful, if I truly believe that on the other side of this thing, I am going to be better than what I entered in, if that's the one thought that I have in my mind as I'm walking through that, we will stay the course. We'll stay the course. I experienced this. My wife and I, we had to say these things. It's going to be for the good. We're going to be better on the other side of this. We're going to be better leaders on the other side of this. This is going to be good. I didn't believe it all the time. But I decided this is what's best. This is where we need to go. This is the truth that we need to hold on to this. And I'm telling you, he is faithful, and he will refine us in the midst of that fire. He will refine us in the midst of it. Every time we face our fears, every time we step into that space of unknown and trust him, our faith grows stronger. Every time we take that chance, that risk, to say something to somebody and we don't know what their response is going to be. We don't know how they're going to come back to us, but we trust that God is faithful in this and that he will take care of us and he will have his vengeance. When we truly believe that, our faith will continue to grow stronger. This is our opportunity. This is our opportunity to grow and not be shackled by these things in our life, these fears and these worries and these anxieties, but that we would begin to live in full freedom that he has for us. He will do the work if we're willing to open ourselves up to him doing the work. And today you may be thinking, the greatest step of overcoming fear may be going, I need to admit that I have fear. That card is for you. That card is for you. Somebody is going to be on the other end of the phone that's not judging, but is there in love and to point you back to Jesus. That's it. Maybe you got your cell phone. You can text listener to 94000. It's the same. It's going to do the same thing. But as we pray, I'm going to pray here in just a minute. And as we pray, if that's you, I just encourage you, don't wait. Don't wait for that fear to take a hold of you, but just start filling it out. Fill that information out. Send that text message. In a moment, we're going to sing a song. The band's going to come on stage, and they're going to sing a song that's powerful, because right now you're thinking you're the only one that is experiencing what you're experiencing. You're the only one that knows what's going on in your life. You're not. God knows what's going on. God knows. And he wants what's good for you. He wants to bring you through it. Let's pray. Father.